Okay, John. Well, I'm glad that we could figure out how to get together on this conversation. We were supposed to do an Instagram live, but tech difficulties could not get you on board. Sorry about that, but thank you so much for adapting with me. Now we're going to record this on here and then post it. It's going to be great, just as good as ever. I've got some questions for you, so we're going to be really good. Okay, you guys, if you don't know who John is, he is the Director of Government Affairs and Sustainability at Viking Yachts. John has had over 25 years of experience advocating for boaters in the marine industry and so much more. John, do you want to tell us just like a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So first, thanks for having me, Katie. This is a really important topic for us and for our customers and the community. So I think it's great that we can share, our perspectives and how we're trying to navigate through this. But yeah, my background on the fisheries side, so I do have a biology degree. I started working at a nonprofit called the Recreational Fishing Alliance that the Viking leadership put together back in the 90s. And it was really aligned exactly how you described it for the most part, in the sense that it wanted to give the marine industry and anglers a voice in both the management process, but also domestically through legislative action, the management process, but also on the international stage as we deal with some of these HMS species. So I was there for a long time. I worked with Jim Donofrio, another really passionate offshore fisherman, really a trailblazer in terms of bluefin tuna fishing and marlin fishing here in New Jersey and up and down the coast. So it was great learning from him and all his colleagues. And then we ultimately decided to wind down the RFA. So we dissolved that organization, and I moved in-house to Viking. And so my scope of work, in a sense, expanded out to some manufacturing issues and some other areas that they needed me to focus on. But fisheries is obviously still extremely important to Viking. Obviously, you're familiar with the brand, the brands we have, and fishing is just a fundamental part of why we are building boats. And so if we don't have well managed fisheries, and if we're not monitoring and tracking that really well, it ultimately has an impact on our bottom line and our business plan. So we want to keep making sure that our fisheries are managed well and we're engaged with the management process.
It's really cool. Thank you so much for that intro. It's really cool to think about it that way because, I think that a lot of people might see boat building as well. They're just, building boats and these diesel guzzlers that go out on the ocean and go fishing and all that stuff. But what's hard to, I think, for a lot of people out of our industry to understand is that without a healthy ocean, we don't have that business. So it really, obviously we want a healthy ocean. I'm a fisherman. I like going offshore and having fish and having a healthy population of fish so that I can continue to do what I love to do. But it also provides so many jobs, both within Viking and outside of Viking. There's so much pro here. And I know that me personally, every time I talk to you, I learn so much. You come at me with all these things that I'm just mind blown about. Today, we're going to focus on the Genetics for Giants and Juvies project that you approached me on I guess now it's a few months ago, which is really cool. You guys, if you haven't heard about this project, I did a podcast with Dr. Walt Gollett from the University of Maine on it. He dove into the science, got super nerdy. So y'all check it out. It's super good. But John, tell me a little bit about this project from your standpoint and why it's important. Let's start with, what is the Close-Kin Mark Recapture Project to you, and AKA the Genetics for Giants and Juvies? You guys, that's the same thing.
Yeah, so I think that was great that you had Walt on there. And of course, he can talk about the technical side of that work better than anyone can. But really why we got involved with this. And first of all, it is important to mention that Walt and his team have been working on this project for a while now. As he said in the podcast that you guys did together, he's had the commercial sector, primarily in the general category, providing samples and giving the heads and all that kind of stuff that are important for this kind of work for a long, long time. We did have some captains on the angling side of this participating as well, but really what we've been trying to do over the past few months is really try to drive the recreational sector to participate at a level that the commercial guys have been doing. And that's really where Viking comes in. And that's why we're trying to really push folks to this. Because obviously, the way we manage bluefin tuna domestically is we kind of partition it based on size in a lot of classes. So like the market fish are over 73 inches. That's the general category. Harpooners, they are the ones that are targeting and selling those fish. All the fish under that, down to 27 inches, are the size classes that the angling category engages with. And so that's been an area where it's been really critical and really important to get the full age profile when you're doing the genetics work, is to get those small fish as well. And then obviously, as you guys talked about during your podcast, the coolest thing about this is, unlike a traditional, a tag where you deploy it and you hope for it to be returned or pop off and send archival data to you, it's sort of one-time use. Like, what's so cool about this is if we can start to provide the genetic material, or, the material and then the analysis, and have that essay in a data set, as that fish engages with other fishermen, commercial or recreational, domestic, international, over its life, you can start to track where it's been and some of those things. So that's why I think the genetics part of this and the Close-Kin Mark Recapture is just so profoundly cool, is because you can almost track a fish throughout its lifetime, which is really,
Yeah, it is really cool. And okay, so you touched on a couple interesting things in that. First, I mentioned the heads from the commercial fishery. So that's like, you guys, if you don't know, that's the actual head of the tuna. So when a tuna is harvested, they save, a lot of times our commercial fleet, they're just so incredible. They save the heads, and Walt and his team actually go out and take a lot of assessments from that head. They can age the fish, they can identify the gender of the fish based on, or the sex of the fish based on the gonads and all that other stuff. And then they can identify genetic markers of that fish. But the fish has to be dead, right, to get that information. Another thing you touched on, John, is satellite tagging, where you can tag these fish and identify where they go, where they are in the water column, where they go in their migrations. And that's really cool too. Very important information. But again, there's a lot of difficulties associated with those processes. But this one, the genetic study, the Close-Kin Mark Recapture, this can be taken on any size tuna. They live, so catch and release, or if you harvest a tuna, you can still take the sample. And what it does is it's giving us so much more information on these fish than we've ever been able to have before, which is how we are going to get really good, accurate, or gives us the ability, to get better stock assessment information on these fish. John, why is that important in terms of in the regulatory scheme of things? Why is it important to have accurate stock assessments, and why do we feel like we don't?
yeah. I mean, I think the stock assessments are just so critical, because they're really what drives and gives the guidance for the management decisions. And when I mean by the management decisions, like really important things like total allowable catch, reference points in terms of MSY, allocations, even to some extent, are driven a lot by the assessment and our understanding about how different subsects or subsections of the population produce offspring and all that kind of stuff. So our knowledge on the scientific level is ultimately what drives a lot of the management decisions. And one thing that fishermen are always very keen to point out a lot of times is that, it does seem like there's either a lag or a disconnect between what we are seeing on the water and ultimately what we are doing from a management, and ultimately sometimes what the assessment is showing. And I mean, you're a fisherman, you grew up, with, tons of time on the water. Fishermen really a lot of times are the first people to recognize a stock that's growing or contracting, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we're sort of sometimes waiting for the science to catch up to that. And so we've had a bit of that happening over the past 2 years, specific to bluefin tuna. In 2024, we exceeded the entire country exceeded our mandated quota. So
Which
basically,
means
so we went over about by like 8% of what our assigned quota is, and it's given in metric tons. Roughly 1,400 metric tons, something to that effect. I'm just going to round it off just to make it easier.
yes,
But we went
please.
over by 8%, right? And this was not just the angling category. This was general category, harpoon. Some of the sectors and categories that have much better quota monitoring than the recreational or angling category has. So to see sort of across the board overages, not huge ones, but across the board overages, is sort of an indication that, wow, there's a lot of fish around, right? And so we
Yeah.
also saw this carry over into 2025, where we had the angling category shut down in August. We saw us going through the trophy allocations in the four regions, going through those very quickly. General categories now also shut down, so no commercial fishing for bluefin tuna through the rest of the year now. And so again, that all kind of drives the fact that we are seeing more bluefin tuna in our waters. The stock is perhaps stronger than we originally projected it should be in this year, and availability is high. And so these are all indications that drive an assessment. And so we're sort of waiting for this information to make its way through the assessment process. We do manage bluefin tuna internationally through ICAP, through a management strategy of evaluation. So it's basically, some people describe it in different ways. I kind of think of it as like putting a bunch of stuff in a crock pot and sort of you get something out of the end. It's not as great as like if you cooked individual parts of that dinner.
Yeah.
It comes out with something that's pretty easy. It's not very complicated, but in a lot of cases it works okay, right? And so
What a fun analogy. I love crockpot dinners.
so right, and sometimes they come out great, right? And so what the MSC really does is it kind of like you just keep plugging in certain bits of information, and at the end it's going to give you some guidance. And in some cases, what happens is you're required to give up some of the nuances that you would see, like if you cooked you like the individual portions of a dinner, right? And so it's hard for it to respond to what we're seeing in the Western Atlantic that we experienced here in the US in 24 and 25. Conversely, it also helps buffer when perhaps there's a year or two where availability is not high and we have questions about what happened to bluefin tuna. Are they on the decline? And so it also prevents some of that whiplash. So you kind of get stability out of it, but it's not as responsive to when we have challenges like we're seeing right now with this high availability in the West.
Is
Another example,
there, sorry, continue. No, 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 go for it.
I was just going to say just one other example specific to bluefin, going back to 2022, because your question originally is why is it important to have really accurate stock assessments? And in that particular year, the LPS, which is the large pelagic survey, which is the primary data collection tool that we use for the angling category, for some reason that year it really missed us encountering the small fish, these school fish, these 2-year-old fish, 27 up to 47 inches. They're about 2 years old and that are ultimately going to work their way through the fishery. And in that year, particularly, the LPS just did not intercept us in a way that gave them the ability to estimate how often we were interacting with that size class. And because of that, it drove this index of abundance for that particular size, which showed that there was concern. And what we had to do is, because we knew that was inaccurate, we had to mobilize, ultimately had to get people that were on the water sending in pictures, sending in reports saying, no, 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 this is just a relic of the survey not capturing these fish.
Yeah.
seeing
Yeah.
that. And so it happens on both sides, right? Like it happens when the stock is exploding. Sometimes things miss an important year class, and we have to figure out how we capture that. But that was a case, in that particular year where if that had ultimately made it into the assessment, the management guidance that would have spit out from that would have been detrimental, and we would have taken a reduction when we perhaps didn't need to. So that's really the importance for fishermen to follow the stock assessments, to provide data where we can, and ultimately to be a part of this process. Because again, going back to my point, a lot of times we're the first ones to see when there's a problem, good or bad, and it really behooves the managers to engage us and utilize us as an asset where they can.
That's really cool. Thank you. Great answer. I just think it's ugh, endlessly thankful and grateful as a fisherman to have people like you, Viking, the Billfish Foundation, just advocating for us so much on the water, as well as our scientific communities and the management, like helping us get all of this info so that it's accessible and also to make sure that our voices are heard. So thank you. I just think that's so cool. What you just said about 2022 is really interesting. I did not know that. So that's crazy. Also, fun fact from my podcast with Walt, I learned that those size tuna, the smaller ones that are about 2 years old, are often the ones that are going to be crossing the oceanic basins a lot. So I'm like from Europe to the US and back, which is crazy to me. The fact that these tunas are so migratory, so highly migratory, HMS, that they're going to so many different countries, there are so many different stakeholders, just make them so hard to manage. And I wanted to ask you, when you said that in 2024, I believe you said that in 2024 we had overages by about 8% in across the board. How does that happen? Because it's like explain to our listeners that maybe haven't ever been involved in the like quota process, saying like, hey, I got a bluefin, like, and putting it into the system and the tonnage and everything. How does an overage happen? And like, what I'm saying is it's not something that happens over the course of a large portion of time. It's something that happens really quickly, and that needs to be the reason that it happens quickly is because there are so many fish. So I guess my question for you, John, is how, like, is there an issue when you have overages that could cause management to, instead of increasing the quota, to decrease the quota as I guess, a knee-jerk reaction to the fact that these tuna were, quote unquote, according to the quotas, overfished? So, like, what's the issue or the potential disaster there?
Yeah, so first I'll just talk about I think your question in regards to how do we monitor. I think that's what you're trying to get at, and we do have different pathways for the commercial sector versus the recreational sector. On the commercial side, they do have mandatory reporting. They have permitting. In the pelagic longline fishery, they have IFQs, so they have a certain amount of tonnage that they can assign for their interactions with bluefin tuna, which they try to avoid. And again, that's whole nother discussion, because as this population continues to grow, and the pelagic longliners are primarily targeting either on the tuna side, yellowfin or big eye. They're trying to stay away from the bluefin, but as this population gets more just spread out across the entire Atlantic coast, it just becomes more challenging for them. So they have mandatory reporting. The dealers that buy those fish also have mandatory reporting. So we can almost have very close to real-time monitoring on the commercial side. And again, there's limitations there, and there's some auditing done. So there is a little bit of a lag, but it's, in our minds of fisheries management, it's very close to real time. On the angling category side, it's a little bit more complicated. We have a couple tools that we can do. One I mentioned before, called the Large Pelagic Survey, which is basically a survey where Um, Folks, it's basically two parts. One, they're calling up people that get the angling category permit. So you go online, you get that permit every year to your boat, you provide your contact information. You're now entered into this sampling frame that they can go back to you and say, how many times did you fish over the past month or 2 months, whatever it is. And so they can get some effort estimates on that. They also send folks out to the docks so they can intercept sport fish boats after they're coming back from a trip. You say, hey, how'd you guys do? Did you catch anything? So they can get some of the species composition there, and then from that they can derive an estimate of what the angling category has done. And this is not just specific to bluefin now. This is with all the tunas, billfish, swordfish, and some shark species as well. On bluefin, we do have it's one of the few fisheries that we do have compulsory mandatory reporting by recreational anglers. So if you have a dead, discarded bluefin tuna, or you bring one back to the dock, you are required to report that within 24 hours. And there's a phone number you can call, or you can do it online. We also capture a decent amount of information on bluefin through the tournaments. HMS tournaments are required to register, and they are required to file a report of all the number of boats that were there, how many days of fishing there were, and what the catch composition was. So that information is captured there. There's also a few states that they are starting to phase this out that required catch cards. So if you're fishing in Maryland, for example, they would require you, if you wanted to, just like a deer tag, if you wanted to land that bluefin tuna, you're required to have a tag on that fish when it's landed. And then you do file a report with that as well. So as you can see, there's many pathways on the angling category side, and quite frankly, there's a significant delay. So you said, how can we have an overage when you have a bite? As you know, as a fisherman, what happens? Like, word gets out, people start going, and a lot of times those data collection programs, especially the survey ones, they can't capture that activity, that effort in real time. A lot of times it'll take like a month and a half before we start to understand how many fish were caught, landed, all that kind of stuff. So it's somewhat of a challenge, and we try to set regulations to the effect that they're not going to try to get us right to our quota, but not exceed it. But when the weather's good, when the fish are close to shore, when there's a lot of them around, when guys on small boats can interact with them, it becomes hard. And that's sort of the situation we're in now.
Yeah. So on that note, why is it important to be involved in the Close-Kin Mark Recapture Project and taking fin clips and sending the samples in, instead of just continuing like we've done in the past as fishermen?
Yeah, so I think this is really important because, there's a couple parts of this. First of all, it goes back to a good point that you made. Close-Kin Mark Recapture is excellent in the situation that we're in right now. So we have the angling category that's been shut down since, I think it was the 12th of August. So in theory, we can't bring any fish back to the dock. We can still catch and release bluefin tuna. So this is a great way for us to continue to capture some really important, valuable information about the bluefin stock, even though we can't bring them back to the dock. So that's a great pathway for us to continue to push. This also allows us to kind of get to a place where we're looking at ways of uncoupling, or maybe that's not the right word, but I'm going to use it. Uncoupling
Love it.
using the same tool for quota management, like I described those various different pathways before, and that being also used for abundance indexes. And the challenge we have there, like in 2025, like, when the LPS is running, and folks are out and the season's open and they're out targeting bluefin tuna, that can drive the LPS to get an understanding of what the success rate is and all that kind of stuff. When the season's closed, though, like we saw in August,
Yeah.
that tool becomes less valuable. And because you definitely fish differently for yellowfin compared to big eye compared to bluefin. And so when the bluefin is closed, it's not like you're just going out there and like, oh, I just want to catch anything. Bluefin is a very targeted sort of fishery, and so you start to lose some of that important information that gives us a sense and some information that we can derive abundance and indexes of availability. So that's one of these challenges where when the season's closed, we start to lose that. Close kin is a way that we can continue to kind of have that opportunity to provide that information. And so we can turn something that's really frustrating and like, boy, I'm really pissed. I can't believe with seasons closed, like, how are we going to fix this, to like, well, here's how, like it's ultimately going to be a data driven decision that gets us to the point where I think we all want to be. And that's to have a good synergy between what we see on water, what the assessment's showing, and how we're managing the stock. And right now we're in a bit of a disarray, and we have a bit of a mismatch. And this is a great way for us to try, as an industry, to provide some of that data that's going to get us to that goal that we all want, which is responsible, sustainable, long-term, healthy management of the bluefin tuna. But we also have to have access to it. We're not going through this process just to have a high level of abundance and preserve it. I mean, this is a take fishery. I mean, bluefin they're really fun to catch, but they're really good to eat. And that's what drives a lot of people out, because it's an accessible one. And I can't coin this term, but a lot of people have described bluefin tuna as the common man's big game fishery, because you don't have to have a big sport fish boat and steam all the way out to the canyons like you do with blue marlin and things like that. I mean, a lot of times bluefin tuna, even the big ones, the giants, are 100 yards off the beach. You can have a
That's crazy.
25-foot. Your friends can pull together and get a big 130, and you can be fishing for those big, or you can go a little smaller and
Seriously.
fishing
Yeah.
80. Your 27 to 73, you're the fish that you can take home. So, but it's really an accessible fishery. And historically, it's always been a small fish fishery, primarily for the angling category. So it's just a really cool fishery. But again, and this Close-Kin Mark Recapture is a great way for us to, as an industry, as the recreational sector, to really contribute in a meaningful way towards the assessment, but also a positive management outcome.
Yes. Awesome. Great answer. Um, for y'all listening in, this is the really exciting part. Anyone can be involved. Anyone, if you're going fishing, it's super easy. There's a form you can fill out. I'll make sure that the link's below. If you're watching this on a social platform that doesn't have links in the description, then check the bio. There's a form you can fill out. You put your information in, and the University of Maine, the Pelagic Fisheries Lab, will send you a kit completely free. You fill it out with your little fin clips. They even give you scissors, and then they pay for you to ship it back to the lab. So it's a really cool way to get involved, to give back to the community, give back to the fishery, and to help us have better stock assessments so that we can have accurate management. And that was really great, John. Okay, so I'm gonna change the tone a little bit. A few months ago, y'all posted about this project on the Viking channels, and there was kind of a backlash from that post, and I really want to address it, because looking through the comments, I was like, no, there's a misunderstanding here. There was a lot of people that thought that y'all weren't focused on conservation or sustainability, because I think the messaging was around not being able to keep as many bluefin as we should be able to keep. And so people, got angry, which I thought was kind of silly, but we both know that the internet is for people to get angry on. silly people. But do you want to talk on that a little bit for me so that I can pick it apart?
Yeah, no, I think that's good that we are, sort of bringing that out in the open because I think it is a little frustrating sometimes, when you have those comments and you can't have the interaction, um, through a comment on Instagram. Sometimes it kind of feels a little like challenging to be like, no, that's not what we meant, or here's the rationale behind that. And so, from Viking's perspective, just to kind of give you some background, I mean, everyone here at Viking, from design and engineering to manufacturing to sales and service, I mean, we're all primarily fishermen. We're drawn to this industry. We're drawn to Viking for this very reason. And our customers are fishermen. The boats that we build are pretty much exclusively designed to engage the HMS fisheries. We have several demo boats, factory demo boats that spend hundreds of hours on the water fishing tournaments, and learning how to refine the design of the boat, a better fishing platform. So, I mean, this is all geared towards building a better boat for fishing. And so, as a privately held company, Viking is able to look to the future and sort of map out, like, how do we want this company to look, 10, 12 years from now? And we're committed to building fishing boats. I mean, that's really what we want to do. And we're not beholden to like a quarterly earnings report or something like that. So we're not in the corporate sense that we're looking at, like what's going to happen at the end of this quarter relative to like, what's happening, what's, ultimately driving our sales, which is the status and our access to a lot of these fisheries. So our future, pretty much our success of our company is really intimately connected to the fisheries, how they're managed, the status of them, and how they're managed. And so, as a like a third generation company, family owned business, I mean, it's really inherently what we are basing the future of the company on. So, in that regard, I mean, it's really important for folks to understand how vested of an interest we have in seeing fisheries managed in a smart, manageable, driven with the best science we have out there. And so that's really, really important for us. Preservation is sort of the easy thing, and as I said before, bluefin tuna it's one of those fisheries that, there's a huge harvest component to it, and rightly so. Fisheries are great, they're in this, category of like, having surplus production, so there are opportunities for us to harvest, a portion of the population without having a detriment to its long-term sustainability. And so that's great. And that's really what natural resource management is all about, is trying to find that balance, right? And that's what Viking is really trying to seek with this, is that we see an imbalance right now. We see high availability. We see a lagging stock assessment failing to capture the growth and availability that we're seeing on the water. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is we're trying to drive fishermen, because we're the greatest asset in this, right? Like, to think about, how would we mobilize NOAA? How would we mobilize the federal government? They're shut down right now, quite frankly. Like, it's hard to even imagine how they would respond to this. But we're on the water. We are the ones that are interacting with this species the most. It's in our best interest to find ways like this project that Walt and his team have put together, to give us the venue, to give us the pathway to provide the data that's ultimately going to give us better information to make management decisions, and to allow companies like Viking and others to be able to access this and to provide boats, to invest in product development, to have Shimano and Akuma and all these others build better reels to catch these big fish. So it's really just like a whole misconception that just because you're in the business of building boats or tackle or whatever it is that's engaging in a fishery, that you're somehow thinking short term, not long term. And I think it's just a misconception.
Yeah, that's just a silly thought, honestly. I think that if anyone takes a big enough step back and actually were to think about it, it makes sense that y'all would be some of the biggest advocate for the ocean and the health of our fisheries, which I think is really cool. Um, I also love that even in this conversation, and you've done this many times when we've spoken in the past, but not only is Viking a sport fishing manufacturer that targets essentially highly migratory species, like we talked about, you're still advocating for people to have potentially one day have the ability to fish for these bluefin tuna from the beach, not using Viking boats. You still want that. It's clear to me when we talk that the community is the priority and the fisheries are the priority. It's not the business that's the priority. It's we want everyone to win in this, including the bluefin tuna, including the University of Maine, including Viking Yachts, including Okuma, including us, the fishermen. And I think that the amount of efforts that are put in to making that happen, whether our conversation is about genetics for giants and juvies, or our conversations are about the speed reduction zones in the Northeast that we talked about in our podcast last year. There's always that underlying passion for the sea and also the advocacy for our fisheries and our communities that lies at the basis of our conversations. And I really appreciate you taking the time, not only doing all of that, but also taking the time to sit with us and talk to us about it. I think that that's great for our conversation today. Do you have anything? I feel like you covered like everything that I wanted to talk about, my main questions. Do you have anything else you want to add to it? Or do you feel the same? Do you feel like you got a good
I feel like we covered everything so far. I mean, the one thing I'll mention, this is a real priority for us. We're trying to ramp up awareness and participation in 25. We got some incentive prizes that we're going to be giving out to top samplers in each state from Maine down to Florida. We're going to give out a prize to the top sampler in 2025. We've got support from Costa Sunglasses and Shimano from that. So we're going to
cool?
continue. We're going to continue to drive people to do this. And we're going to go into 26 and beyond because, as you and Walt discussed, I mean, this is just the start, and the non-commercial class of bluefin tuna, that 27 up to 73. I mean, that was really where we were lacking in a lot of the genetic material. And so we're really focused on trying to drive recreational anglers to participate, to see the value in this. If you're frustrated, if you're, you want to see things differently, I mean, this is the pathway that it happens, and what's so cool about this is that, the material, the tissue that we provide, the samples that we send off to Walt and his team, they do the genetic analysis. I think what's really cool about this as well is that it's not just, the folks at University of Maine, and this is available for anyone to look at. So you start to think about what a valuable resource and data set this becomes, because it's not just locked away with one professor at one university. I mean, this is open to the world to do analysis on and to get a better understanding. And all the preliminary information that we've seen, I know you guys talked about some of the southern bluefin tuna work. There's been some preliminary work done on western bluefin tuna looking at the CKMR, and there's some real positives to it, so it's not like we're being theoretical and hoping. Like everything that we've seen, like this is a direction we should be going because it has very positive management outcomes, at least from what we're seeing. So it's a direction we want to drive everyone. This is just the start. We're gonna really hope everyone continues to sample, because we can, even though harvest is closed, we can still continue to sample, catch and release for bluefin tuna all the way through the end of the year. And then hopefully as the season kicks off in 26, we'll be right back at it. People will be requesting kits, and we'll be driving this project.
Oh, so good, John. Thank you so much. And another fun thing, I just love this concept. I just think is so cool. Tagging with people, you get information, and if that tag, the spaghetti tag, gets caught somewhere else, you get to know where it was caught. Well, what a great way to spend time with your loved ones on the water is go bluefin fishing, get a fin clip, send it in, and share that information with the person you're fishing with. So girlfriends, daughters, wives, husbands, if you're, a badass. So thank you so much, John. I really appreciate it. This has been an The ultimate pleasure, as always. You guys check out the information that we have below for more on the giveaways, for more on getting your own sample kits, for more on learning more information through our podcast with Dr. Walt, and whatever else might be out there. Thank you so much for your time, John.
Great. Thanks for having me, Katie.
I thought my mic was muted. All right. Have a great day, y'all. Thank you.